Dr. Hughes, I'd like to start with you. I spoke of employment and the expectation of job growth in 2015. Can you give us a sense of how New Jersey is comparing relative to the rest of the country?
Well, first of all, the survey results do parallel quite closely the trajectory of the New Jersey economy. And the state economy and the improvement measured by the survey was really based on 2011, 2012, and the first half of 2013. We had sustained improvement in job growth, each year surpassing the year before it. But in the summer of 2013, somebody hit the economic pause button, and we had subsequently 3 one-time unique events which did slow job growth within the state. The first was the very bad summer shore season in 2013. This was the aftershock of Superstorm Sandy. And vacation dollars, very substantial flows of vacation dollars that normally flow into New Jersey from out of state did not occur. At the same time, New Jersey's spending on vacations tended to migrate out of state. They were afraid and uncertain about the condition of the New Jersey shore. After we passed through that, then we had some very disastrous winter weather events, which really were very, very evident in the job registers that we were measuring and the like. And so we thought the economic refresh button was then hit. Then we saw the resizing of the Atlantic City casinos so that they could position themselves in a competitive environment and they were no longer in a monopoly environment. So those 3 events, one time, did slow the economy. It probably had some impact on the survey, but I think as the year comes to a close, it looks like the economy is getting back on track, and certainly 2015 will surpass 2014. None of those years did we have any job decline. We just had basically a slowdown from the very, very powerful momentum that was building up.
Great, thank you. So we heard a lot about tax and tax climate, and we know that we're in a very challenging tax climate here in New Jersey. Jay, what can we do to address the tax challenges?
So New Jersey's competitive position is evident in the location decisions that companies make, and you know, it's a testament to the businesses that are here and the many that are continuing to invest in New Jersey, even operating within fairly high costs of doing business environment, that at the margin, costs, including taxes, are important, but they're not the only decision-making factor. The talent, access to talent, the access to markets, all go into the mix, and in many cases, you know, are more important to the basic operating success of a business. But at the margin, everyone knows costs matter, and taxes are among the more significant costs that companies are dealing with in New Jersey. And what's particularly challenging is that companies can find a much lower cost regime so close by. Mm-hmm. You have New Jersey sort of flanked on the west and south by Pennsylvania and Delaware, and certainly businesses in parts of the state where much of their workforce may already be commuting within an interstate kind of labor shed. You know, the temptations to move, both for lower operating costs as well as lower personal costs at both the executive and ownership level, as well as for employees, you know, can be achieved so nearby. I will say, though, that New Jersey is benefiting from a similar sort of competitive border challenge, and that is on the north in New York. The northern part of the state continues to receive an inflow into migration of jobs from companies that are moving from even a higher cost location into New Jersey, and that has generated an enormous amount of job growth in the northern part of the state across many industries. In that way, it's reminiscent of the old Ben Franklin line that New Jersey is a beer keg tapped at both ends. You know, what's coming into the north to some extent is draining in the south, but as Jim has indicated, we're having, you know, net still, you know, significant job growth, some quarters more robust than others. That's telling you that on balance, this is still a pretty good place to do business. Companies are making the decision to move here, grow here, hire here every day.
Jim, do you want to weigh in on the external investment and how New Jersey incentives drive that into the state?
Yeah. I think the platinum standard of economic development are what we now term externally supported industries. In the old economic development literature, those were export-based industries or basic industries and the like. And these are economic activities that have markets both nationally and globally. And essentially, those are wealth creators. They draw significant flows of dollars into the state, which in turn, when they're spent within the state, support small businesses, support consumer spending, and the like. The best example of that was AT&T before the divestiture of all its subunits, and it lost its monopoly status. But at one time, it had monopoly status to provide long-distance telephone services to the rest of America. Other things being equal, New Jersey accounts for roughly 3% of the nation's population in jobs. So 97% of AT&T's revenues came from outside of New Jersey and flowed into New Jersey. And that supported billions and billions of dollars in payroll paid by somebody else. So we had the massive AT&T headquarters in Basking Ridge, the Long Line headquarters in Bedminster, Bell Labs in Holmdel, Bell Labs in Murray Hill. So those external flows into New Jersey generated 20, 30, 40,000 positive high-paying jobs within the state. And so their spending, their consumer spending supported a lot of businesses. The corporate spending within the state also supported a whole range of businesses. That's where we should be aiming at economic development and any special incentive programs that we have, really to support externally supported industries which are wealth-creating, wealth-generating activities.
So it's very interesting, and we get it as we're discussing it. However, what we also heard from our survey is many of our members either don't know about the incentives or they don't think that they are eligible for the incentives. Now, I want to remind everyone that our survey, 75% was 25 employees or less, and BIA, the majority of our membership, reflects that. So we are truly a small business organization, much reflective of the makeup of the state of New Jersey. So I want to now take the concept, because it sounds really good. We have a tough time, our new word of the week is always contextualizing. We have a tough time putting that into easy speak for small business to understand how they benefit from that. And Jay, I'm wondering if you could spend a little bit of time on how tax credits directly can help small business. How do we put it in a way that small business understands what's really in it for them?
Sure. So most of what business people know about incentives is what they're reading about as the EDA issues another set of tax credits to various businesses. And the projects that get the coverage are the big ones. Subaru, just a week ago, for their decision to move their corporate headquarters, the North American corporate headquarters, into Camden, would be an export business that Jim is referring to. That operation runs all of Subaru's activities in North America. So you have people at that headquarters who are going to be, are spending money in New Jersey that's being made from around the country. Mm-hmm. What small business profits or benefits from the incentives programs in a number of ways. When a Subaru decides to locate in New Jersey versus, let's say, Pennsylvania, which was the comparison that they were considering, they spend an enormous amount of money on vendors, on consultants. Their own employees, most of which will live nearby, are spending money in stores and for services. So that's the so-called multiplier effect, which the New Jersey EDA evaluates for pretty much every major project to assure that there's a, quote, net benefit to the state that's at least 100% plus 10, mm-hmm. higher than the incentives that are being requested or awarded, again, for every project. that multiplier effect is the ripple effect, the sort of additional injection of economic benefit and activity that the state and its businesses and other employees can expect to benefit from. And we can see it. And it's not just an econometric model. We know from common sense how this works, that a company that has a contract with Subaru to provide consulting services, or the employees are going out to dinner, or using local law firms and real estate firms, all of that impact with multiplying effects through all of the spending that those who benefit then make in their communities is really kind of what we really need out of an economy, which is dynamic, growing on its own growth in ways that at some point become unpredictable but exciting. So you have both the large projects that we're reading about generating economic activity up and down the economic scale in the state for large and small businesses. But you also then have a whole series of programs that EDA administers which are directly focused on small businesses as the direct beneficiaries. And they're some of the most robust and best designed programs that we see in working with the Economic Development Authority counterparts in states all over the country. And they range from credit enhancement to direct loans to, and even the program that Subaru accessed, which is the Grow New Jersey tax credit program. The lowest point of access there is 10 jobs for certain types of companies, for so-called technology companies, and that's a very accessible, point of access for what are extremely valuable tax credits. And let me just spend one more minute on the tax credits themselves, because the legislature, in a recent amendment, made a quiet but important change in the Grow New Jersey tax credit program, and that was that it set at $25,000 the smallest denomination at which a tax credit can be sold. Let me give you context. The tax credits, when awarded to a company, in many states, tax credits, if they don't have a sufficient tax liability, the tax credits are stranded. These tax credits are designed by law to be transferable so that they're liquid. If they can't be used fully by the recipient, they're sold. Other taxpayers can then reduce their tax burden.
So they become a commodity, pretty much.
They become a commodity. Prior to this recent amendment, the state Treasury Department was limiting tax credit transfers to $1 million per trade. Now that limits access to these tax savings instruments to only the very largest companies. We had broad base of support for an initiative to drop that minimum sale price to $25,000. So if you have $25,000 of tax liability in New Jersey, you can buy one of these credits. And you still have to find someone who's going to sell it to you. The market is young and still being developed. But like all markets that have a similar mission between buyers and sellers, there will be a sophisticated market that develops that creates liquidity and predictability and good pricing for companies large and small. And that is not the methodology most people have in mind when they think of tax reform.
Sure.
But it is a way, through incentives, providing a broad base of opportunity to participate in lowering tax burdens for companies to reduce their burdens and make New Jersey a more competitive place to do business. So
transferability of tax credits, something that we have to try to educate our businesses on, that there is an opportunity actually now down to the level of $25,000, you said. That's tremendous. And let me just say, so small business, again, our attempt to contextualize to our small businesses. So is it fair for me to go to my member company, who's the pizzeria 3 blocks down from Subaru, and say, because there's 100 new jobs coming here, you're going to sell 10 more pizzas next week?
500 new jobs, so that's 50 new pieces.
Perfect.
Right.
They're going to love to hear that. Okay. You heard in the survey, for the first time we asked about inheritance and estate taxes, and you heard that 50% of our members think it's a significant issue when they think about planning for their future. I'd like to spend a minute on that, gentlemen. What you think about that, how you feel, or why you feel that is so significant in their business planning, especially because many small business is family and generational. And if you have any thoughts on what perhaps we could do by way of mitigating that.
I'll just start, and then
thank you.
Jay can give the real answer. It's evident in the migration patterns out of state. I mean, we are in a serious net out migration position. Many more people moving out of state to the rest of the country than people from the rest of the country moving into New Jersey. And the only reason it's reasonably in balance is net immigration from abroad. And many of those out migrants have indicated that those two taxes were very significant inputs into their decision to ultimately leave New Jersey when they retire.
So we're accumulating our wealth in New Jersey, but we're spending our wealth during our retirement somewhere else.
I think also, and this is an important consideration for small business, when entrepreneurs are ready to not just retire but sell their business.
Yes.
It's, we said New Jersey is not the best place to die or to sell a business. Actually in opposite order, but chicken and egg. But I mean, that's an important point. I mean, even if someone's not ready to retire, may have serial entrepreneurs. They may find that it's a good place to start a business, but when it comes time to monetize that effort, that sweat equity and the value creation, many companies are deciding, many entrepreneurs are deciding to move either nearby, Pennsylvania, or places like Florida and other sort of income tax-free environments and capital gains tax-free environments.
Jim, you spoke earlier about the suburbs of New Jersey having been a place for external flow and creation of jobs, and you referenced some key companies in some key suburban areas. There's a big demographic shift going on in the state of New Jersey, if not nationally. We hear it every day. Millennials want to live in urban centers. We need to ensure that we have these vibrant centers with good infrastructure to support them. And then the flip of that, and the unintended consequence perhaps, but what we're stuck with is a lot of stranded assets in suburbia. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, to some degree this is a perfect demographic and economic storm that's hitting the state. We're going through the greatest age structure transformation in history. Two distinct population cohorts, a maturing baby boom, and I call it maturing because the baby boom is getting very mad at me for calling it aging. And my truth in advertising.
Contrary to the obvious, right?
My favorite academic spectator sport is terrorizing baby boomers about their inexorable aging. And I think I see more than a few maturing boomers in the audience this morning. But I'm not going to torture you, except to say the end of this year there will not be baby boomers born between 1946 and 1964. By the end of this year, there will not be a baby boomer under 50 years of age. And what they have to look forward to is 2016. The first boomer, it'll be the year of the Big Bang. The first boomer will hit the big 7-0, 70 years of age. That's traumatic for that generation, but it does represent the workforce of the past. Also, New Jersey was baby boom central. We were the essential suburban watershed for New York City and Philadelphia. So in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we had a huge suburbanization of population. So New Jersey's baby boom was the most suburban-centric generation in history. And that's why we had a lot of economic activities locating in the suburbs, because that's where the labor force was. They're being replaced by millennials or echo boomers, generally born between 1977 and 1995. These are a completely different generation than their baby boom parents. They have different values, different work ethics, and the like. Basically, they are a 24/7 generation, the most talented, we call the digerati, and they have even more advanced efforts and desires of where they want to work and where they want to live. So They don't want plain vanilla suburbs. They want 24/7 activity environments. When you look at the data, it seems like Brooklyn is draining the demographic vitality of central New Jersey. So a task for our policymakers and the like is to realize we have to provide eco-boomer, millennial-friendly places of living, friendly places of working. So what we are seeing as a result of that is the incredible shrinking outer suburban office footprint. Basically, the office our suburban office inventory is aging. Brief bit of history, from 80 to 90, we had one of the greatest office building booms in history. 80% of all the office space ever built in the history of the state went up in that decade, most of it in suburban growth corridors. That inventory next year will be between 25 and 35 years of age. Much of it is obsolete. So I could characterize our outer suburban footprint as basically oversupplied and under-demolished. And we're going to see all the ramifications of that over the next several years.
So what can we do? What is our message to our policymakers, as well as perhaps our local officials in the suburban areas where we're going to start seeing these stranded assets? What do we do?
So I think it's a question of policy can't and shouldn't buck massive demographic trends, right? They have to work with and get the best out of them for the most people. And I think New Jersey's policies, from planning to incentives, are all harnessed in the right direction. They're all smart growth focused. The incentives are deeper by every measure in the urban centers, and some of them deeper than others, versus suburban locations and exurban locations where, candidly, there isn't a public policy reason to incent development of another suburban office building out at the intersection of Interstate X and Y.
Right.
And by the way, it may not even matter, because there's almost no demand for an office building in that location, auto-dependent, a building in a sea of asphalt. The employees want what Jim was referring to. They want density, they want the vibrance of a cluster, they want 24/7 environments. By the way, they don't need a walled office, a private office. Most of the office environments are open space. They're much denser, probably twice the number of occupants per square foot than in the standard that was prevailing when those office buildings were built in the suburbs. So we need also less office space to accommodate the same level of economic activity today than we did 10 years ago. That's another sort of consideration for the development community. I will say, just as an example, that one other point about why employers and employees have a common interest in these new, vibrant urban centers of employment, and that is they tend to be mass transit. The best of them are mass transit served, which means that companies can access really vast labor sheds within an acceptable commute time, versus an auto-dependent location where you may only get a third of the labor access within the same commute, within the same acceptable commute. One other point about how incentives are pulling in the right direction for this trend in New Jersey. If you look at the Urban Transit Tax Credit Program, which really sort of kicked off this sort of massive incentive-led boom in investment and employment in the state. You look at Newark and Panasonic's decision to relocate to Newark. The Transit Tax Credit Program made it possible for a city that has not seen new construction in a generation to have a corporate tenant of the scale and credit strength of Panasonic to come in and anchor a new building. That generated an enormous amount of controversy, including a fair amount of litigation, as the gateway landlords all sued. In a related case with Prudential, same story, two major corporate anchors willing to to double down, if you will, to make the kind of commitment and have the balance sheet that can actually get a big new building built. That left vacancy in their wake. Bad news, actually good news. Needed vacancy in office space to compete. They needed to create vacancy in the gateway buildings right on top of the train station for those landlords to then renovate those spaces to modern standards of occupancy, and those spaces are now being filled. That gave Newark the opportunity. Look, we all know, anybody who's in business knows you need inventory on the shelves in order to sell. If you don't have inventory, you have no sales. Newark had no inventory. They needed modern new office space in a transit hub in order to compete, and that's going to make the difference for Newark and places like New Brunswick and places like Camden now getting its turn, you know, at bat.
Yeah, Camden's doing a great job at doing that.
And it's really the state incentives that are the reason for that.
Right.
And then lots of smaller communities that are along all the train lines that are creating their mini hubs, all of which are becoming vibrant, exciting places to work, to live, to play, enormous retail opportunities. This is very exciting for New Jersey.
It is an exciting time, and I think anyone who rides the Northeast Corridor now sees that the hubs along the way have a significant amount of redevelopment going along. I do have to say the term eco-boomer, millennial-friendly, that must be my house, because my eco-boomers are back home, and I must be making it too friendly because they're not leaving. So
yeah, let me
yes, 1 minute, and then we're gonna wrap up with some
give
principles.
an illustration of value changes between millennials and baby boomers. Baby boomer status symbols: how many ceiling tiles are in my office, and how close is my reserved parking spot to the entrance of the building. Millennials, what's the quality of collaborative spaces, choice of workspaces, access to all types of activities, walking environments, and public transit.
And can I bring my dog to work?
Yes. And I just say we've been touring. I've been out doing my listening tour, and I visited a lot of corporate headquarters, and what we're seeing more and more is this open air environment. In fact, yesterday we spoke with a large corporation who's building a whole new facility, and they said in the new facility it's going to be nothing like the facility we're standing in today, because we're going to the open floor model. And candidly, the boomer who I was talking to was a little bit nervous about the move, but he was willing to give it a chance. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. We are going to finish this session up with your input, because we do have 2 text questions that we'd like to ask you so that you can